26 centuries ago, in a kingdom most people today have never heard of, a king did something that would change human civilization forever. He took small lumps of precious metal, stamped them with a royal mark, and released them into his markets. It seems simple, almost obvious, but before this, there was no such thing as a coin. Trade meant weighing lumps of metal, bartering goods, and trusting no one. After it, value could travel in your pocket, guaranteed by the stamp of a king. That king's wealth became so legendary that thousands of years later, we still use his name as a measure of riches. Rich as Croesus, he ruled the kingdom of Lydia, and he is credited with helping create the world's first true coinage. His story is a parable about money, confidence, and the danger of believing that wealth makes you invincible. His name was Croesus, and he may have invented the most powerful technology in history. Money is so woven into our lives that we forget it is the guarantee that allows the whole system to work. For most of human history, there were no coins. People traded by barter, swapping grain for cloth, cattle for tools. These were clumsy exchanges that required both sides to want exactly what the other had. Where metal was used, it had to be weighed on a scale every time and tested for purity. Because a lump of silver is only worth something if you can trust its weight and its purity. This friction made large-scale trade slow and risky. Then, in the kingdom of Lydia, someone solved the problem. By stamping a piece of metal with an official royal symbol, the state was making a promise. This piece weighs what it should and is as pure as it should be. You no longer had to weigh it or test it. You could simply count it. That single idea, standardized, guaranteed money, would reshape trade, taxation, war, and power across the entire world. And the king whose name became forever linked to coins and to almost unimaginable wealth was Croesus of Lydia. Lydia sat in western Anatolia at the crossroads between the Greek world and the great empires of the East. It was perfectly placed to grow rich on trade. But Lydia had something else, something rare and precious. It had gold. A river ran through the kingdom, and according to legend and history, its waters carried flecks of gold. They carried a natural alloy of gold and silver called electrum, washed down from the mountains. The Lydians learned to collect this metal, and it gave them a natural source of wealth that few kingdoms could match. Lydian craftsmen and rulers began producing small, standardized pieces. Over time, the technology improved. Croesus, or the kingdom under him, refined the process of refining gold. They helped to separate gold from silver and issue reliable coins of consistent, trusted value. Lydia was no longer just a kingdom with gold in its rivers. It was a kingdom with a portable, trustworthy, countable form of wealth. This was a form of wealth that made trade easier than ever before. And at the center of it sat a king whose treasury overflowed. It is worth pausing to appreciate just how powerful this invention truly was. First, it solved trust. A stamped coin from a respected authority did not need to be tested. The mark was the guarantee. Strangers could trade with confidence because they both trusted the same king's seal. Second, it solved speed. Counting is far faster than weighing and assaying metal. Deals could be struck in moments, and commerce could scale up in ways that had never been possible. Third, it gave the state extraordinary new power. Whoever issued the coins controlled the money itself. A king could pay his soldiers, fund his building projects, and collect his taxes in a single, standardized currency. Money became an instrument of state power, not just private exchange. The Greeks adopted it and ran with it. Within centuries, coins were the lifeblood of the ancient economy. The idea that began in Lydia became one of the foundational technologies of civilization. And it made its royal sponsor, Croesus, the very symbol of wealth itself. Croesus became famous in his own time and ever after for his staggering wealth. He sent lavish gifts of gold to the great Greek sanctuary at Delphi, offerings so rich they amazed the ancient world. To be rich as Croesus is to be rich beyond reason. But with that wealth came pride. And here the ancient sources turn his story into a moral lesson, one of the most famous in all of history. The Athenian sage Solon, the wisest man in the Greek world, came to visit Croesus at his court. Croesus showed off his enormous treasures and then asked Solon who the happiest man in the world was. He fully expected to hear his own name, but Solon refused to flatter him. He named ordinary men who had died well. Solon gave a warning that would echo through the ages. Because fortune is fickle, and no one can be called truly fortunate until their life has ended well. Croesus, surrounded by his gold, was annoyed. He thought the philosopher a fool. At the height of his power, Croesus faced a rising threat in the east. The Persian Empire was growing. Under Cyrus the Great, it was expanding rapidly. Croesus considered going to war to stop it. But, being a careful king, he first consulted the most famous oracle in the world. At Delphi, the very sanctuary he had showered with gold, he asked whether he should march against Persia.
The oracle gave its legendary answer. If Croesus went to war, it said, he would destroy a great empire.
Croesus was delighted. He heard exactly what he wanted to hear, and he marched east, confident of victory. But the oracle, in its famous ambiguity, had not said which great empire would fall. Croesus went to war, and the great empire that was destroyed was his own. Cyrus captured the capital and brought the kingdom of Lydia to an end. The richest king in the world The man whose name meant wealth itself lost everything. His kingdom, his treasure, his crown. His gold had not made him invincible. It had made him overconfident. Croesus leaves us with two very different legacies, and both still matter today.
The first is the financial revolution associated with his kingdom, whatever the legends say about his fall.
Standardized coinage was one of the most important inventions in economic history. It expanded markets, empowered states, and created the very concept of money as we know it. A trusted, countable store of value, backed by an authority. Every coin in your pocket, every price tag, every bank balance descends in some way from that Lydian idea. His story, then, is about the power of trust made tangible. The genius was not the gold. It was the guarantee. Croesus and the Lydians understood that a trusted standard is worth more than the metal itself. The second lesson is darker and just as enduring. Wealth is not the same as wisdom. And gold is not the same as security. Croesus had more money than anyone alive, and it made him arrogant. He misread an oracle because he heard what he wanted to hear, and he marched to ruin, convinced his fortune made him safe. The richest man in the world fell because he believed his wealth made him invincible. Count no man happy, Solon had said, until the end. The kingdom of Lydia vanished into the Persian Empire, but its great invention did not die with it. The Persians, the Greeks, and later the Romans all embraced coinage. It became the bloodstream of the ancient world. Taxes were collected in coin. Vast trade networks ran on it. Armies were paid with it. Consider how completely this shaped the world, making it possible to tax efficiently and to build empires. It created wealth on a scale barter never could, and became one of the engines of civilization itself. Today, scholars still debate the precise details, who struck the very first coin, and where legend ends and history begins. But the essential truth endures. In Lydia, humanity took one of its greatest leaps, turning raw metal into trusted money. Croesus stands at that threshold, the richest of kings, the symbol of wealth, and a warning. He reminds us that gold can buy almost anything except wisdom, and that the proudest fortune can fall with a single overconfident step. His treasury is long gone. His kingdom is dust. But every time you spend, save, or trust a coin, you are living inside the world that Lydia made. The king who measured his life in gold is gone, but money, his true legacy, rules on. From the birth of money itself, we turn next to a company that turned money into something no nation had ever seen. A corporation with its own armies, its own navy, and the power to wage war. Subscribe to Empire Builders and join us next time for the story of the first true multinational, the Dutch East India Company.